Every year, we commemorate many historic days around the world, and today we bring you the top 5 remarkable events that changed history forever. Number 5. The Victoria Hall Disaster. June 16, 1883, Sunderland, England. It was the 16th of June 1883, and a show was to be held at the Victoria Hall, Sunderland. Some 2,000 children, mostly aged 7 to 11, crowded into the hall to see the show. Each child paid 1 pence to see the Fays, from Tynemouth Aquarium, which promised to be the greatest treat for children ever given, and offered them a chance to win a prize, such as a toy or a book. Unfortunately, parents who wished to accompany their children had to pay 8 pence per ticket, so by the day of the event, there were hardly any adults around. On the day of the event, about 1,100 of the 2,000 attendees were seated in the upstairs gallery, while the remainder attendants were seated downstairs. Children laugh as they watch magicians and ventriloquists perform. A few minutes into the show, Mr. Fay, the performer of the act, gave some prizes to children on the lower floor who had a winning ticket, causing a lot of jumping and pushing from the children on the first floor. The problem began when Mr. Fay called the youngest from the upper level of the hall to collect their prize. Then 1,100 unsupervised children, between the ages of 7 and 14, rushed down the stairs. 4 flights of stairs were accessible from the upstairs gallery through outward folding doors, through which the children plowed at great speed until they reached the bottom of the 3rd flight, where the disaster occurred. It appeared that the inward door at the end of the 3rd flight had been partially bolted into a hole, leaving a gap of 20 inches through which children were admitted at the beginning of the show. Due to the lack of adult supervision, it was unclear how the disaster started, but soon children were being crunched against doors and walls. In total, 185 children died after falling and tumbling over themselves. As a result of the disaster, some families lost all their kids. Among the children found dead was a 30-child Sunday school class that died from asphyxia. In the aftermath of the incident in the Victoria Hall of 1883, the Parliament passed laws requiring places of entertainment to have more exits and emergency exits, and set a mandatory outwards opening law for all doors as well. Number 4. Boeing 757 of American Airlines. On the 20th of December 1995, American Airlines Flight 965 was scheduled to depart Miami at 4:40 p.m. with a destination of Cali, Colombia. Despite this, the takeoff was completed at 6:35 p.m. due to delays in air traffic at Miami International Airport. After takeover, the aircraft flew over Cuba, Jamaica, and then Colombia airspace. The plane entered Colombia via Cartagena and Bogotá, traveled through Colombian airspace for approximately 1 hour and 12 minutes, and stayed in the proper flight pattern until reaching Cali. At approximately 9:34 p.m. Tafuri, the captain, contacted the Cali controller to request permission to begin descending for Bonilla, Aragon. The control tower at Bonilla, Aragon Airport granted authorization to start the descent and approach the aircraft to the high radio beacon frequency of Cali, in order to maintain a final altitude of 15,000 feet. The controller also requested that the position of the aircraft be reported as it passed through Tuluá, and from this point on, a series of mistakes were unchained. Although the descent authorization was granted, it did not mean that the plane could avoid passing through Tuluá, but instead the pilot Tafuri revised the route on the computer, which meant that with the technology of that time, the route that had previously been traced, including the pass through Tuluá, had been erased. At approximately 9:36 p.m., the Cali Tower of Control offered Tafuri the chance to change the landing direction. Instead of landing on runway 1, the flight will land on runway 19, allowing the captain to land directly without having to turn around the Bonilla Aragon Airport. So it was necessary for the captain to go through the Rosso radio beacon to access the new landing runway, and so, once accepted, a suitable landing height was reached by increasing the rate of descent. The plane was heading down at 300 km per hour at 9:37, but confusion overtook Capitan Tifuri, who was questioned about his location in Tuluá, but he had already rescheduled and was en route to Rosso. The captain then picked up the charts to try to find answers, but there was little time to land the plane, so the captain asked if he could forget about Tuluá, and the control tower responded yes. The captain re-entered the route in the navigation computer, and this one steered the plane to Rosso, but by mistake, and without knowing the plane's exact location, the route programmed into the navigation computer was Romeo, a radio beacon that led to Bogotá. In this error in the navigation program, the aircraft diverted from its route to the left and moved over 18 kilometers away from the intended landing route. The aircraft descended at over 350 kilometers per hour over the central mountain range. Once the captain and the first officer realized that they were heading in the wrong direction, the captain asked the control if he could turn right to rejoin the route. But then, the land proximity was activated. Both pilots tried tirelessly to raise the plane's nose at maximum speed, but the plane was already deployed landing gear by that point. By 9:43 p.m., the Cali aircraft controller lost contact with the American Airlines Boeing 757, which crashed in the mountains of Buga, Colombia. It was one of the worst aviation accidents in history, claiming the lives of 159 people. To prevent similar accidents from happening again, the aviation laws were changed years later. Some of those changes included a mandatory change in radars at the airports, and aircraft were also equipped with advanced technology, such as radars and alert systems that could control the aircraft in case of imminent collisions. Number 3. The Radium Girls. New Jersey, 1925. During World War I, the United States entered an era of extraordinarily high demand for wristwatches among its troops in the fighting camps. Soldiers during night maneuvers had an additional requirement for their garment, that they could read the time in the dark. In response to this need, a chemical discovered recently provided the ideal solution: radium. And in an instant, luminescent watches became a thriving industry. The young workers at the United States Radium Corporation factory painted dials with camel hair brushes and became accustomed to periodically sucking on the bristles of the brushes to achieve precision. This led them to absorb, orally, lethal doses of radium unknowingly. Initially, the dentists were not able to explain what kind of disease was slowly disintegrating their patients' jaws. Afterwards, tumors began to appear in other parts of the skeleton. One after another, the young woman workers died without being diagnosed. Despite the fact that the levels of radioactivity found in the bodies were 1,000 times higher than the tolerable limit, it took many years for it to be discovered that radium poisoning was the cause of the workers' deaths. And the paint used on the luminescent dials, the reason. Unlike the chemist, who handled radium with great care, the girls working with radium did not have any form of protection, and they died without knowing why. Their skills with the brush made them attractive to employers, as did their willingness to accept less pay. The company was convicted of negligence and delayed payment of a tiny compensation, finally given to the workers after 14 years of litigation. About 4,000 women were employed to paint solder dials with radium, working in an unknown bright dust, and with no protection, as well as poor labor rights and gender discrimination. These women, unaware of it, paved the way for fair working laws and changed industrial laws that led to the creation of OSHAs and many more changes that shaped history and labor rights. Number 2. The Titanic. April 14 to April 15, 1912. The transatlantic service was a premium service in the early 1900s, a highly profitable and competitive industry, with ship lines vying for wealthy travelers, as well as immigrants. The company Holland and Wolff built most of the White Star's ships, some of the fastest ships at the time, and also planned to build a world-class liner that would be admired more for its class than for its speed. Planning led to the construction of the Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Both Olympic and Titanic were designed by Thomas Andrews of Harvard and Wolff, and both were loaded with luxurious ornate decorations. The Titanic had 4 elevators, a large swimming pool, and an immense first-class dining room. Its second-class accommodations were comparable to those on other ships' first-class accommodations, and its first-class accommodations were modest but comfortable. According to builders, 4 of the ship's compartments could be floated without endangering the liner's buoyancy. The way the Titanic was built led many to claim that it was unsinkable. After the Olympic's maiden voyage, in June 1911, slight changes were made to the Titanic's design, and in early April 1912, the ship underwent its sea trials and was declared seaworthy.
The Titanic sailed from Southampton, England to New York City on April 12, 1912. It was captained by Edward J. Smith, also known as the Millionaire's Captain, and was loaded with prominent Americans, including businessmen and journalists.
As scheduled, the liner sailed from Queenstown, Ireland, on the morning of April 11 for New York at approximately 1:30 p.m. At 9:40 p.m., the Titanic was crisscrossing icebergs at 22 knots. And without being warned of an icefield warning from MESOBA, an iceberg was spotted near Newfoundland, Canada, approximately 400 nautical miles away, and the bridge had already been notified. William Murdoch successfully contacted the Titanic and ordered it to maneuver back to port. With the message, the Titanic began to turn, but it was too late by then to avoid colliding. The starboard side scraped against the iceberg, rupturing at least 5 of the Titanic's watertight compartments towards the bow, causing the forward compartments to fill with water, allowing the bow to sink deeper and deeper, sealing the ship's fate. There were no answers to calls to nearby vessels, and the lifeboats began to be launched into the water, with women and children initially. As the Titanic was only loaded with 20 lifeboats, which could only carry 1,178 of the 2,200 people on board, the initial fear and confusion led some of the lifeboats to be launched well under capacity. And at 2:20 a.m., the ship was slowly disappearing beneath the Atlantic. In the end, only 705 people were rescued from lifeboats. Hundreds of passengers and crew members went into ice-cold water. The lifeboats, with space to carry more passengers, delayed the return to pick up survivors, in fear of being swamped by the desperate passengers in the water, leaving more than 1,500 people to perish in the good Atlantic waters. On September 1, 1985, the final discovery of the shipwreck revealed the many changes that the sinking of the world's largest shipping had on sea travel around the world. An ice patrol whose sole objective is to patrol the seas and actively report unusual activity was implemented 2 years after the disaster, and has been managed by the United States Coast Guard since 1913 as a result of the disaster. Additionally, as a result of the radio interference that prevented the Titanic from being aware of the icebergs, the Radio Act of 1927 required the vessels to maintain constant communication with other vessels and radio stations nearby. Also, following the Titanic sinking, international conventions for the safety of life at sea in 1914 required every vessel to carry enough lifeboats for each person aboard. Keep up with the latest top 5 videos by subscribing to the channel, liking, and activating the notifications bell below. Number 1. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. March 25, 1911. In February 1908, thousands of garment workers, primarily women, went on strike and marched through the city to protest against their working conditions. being employed in the lower echelons of the garment industry, earning low wages, and sometimes being subjected to sexual harassment. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, founded in 1900 in Greenwich Village, New York, was one of the largest companies in this industry at the time. The factory was owned by Max Blank and Isaac Harris, who produced women's blouses, called shirtwaists, tailored, button-down blouses that were popular at the time. It was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the 10-story Ash Building, just east of Washington Square Park, in the Greenwich Village neighborhood of New York City. The factory normally employed about 500 workers, mostly young Italian and Jewish immigrant women and girls, some as young as 14, who worked 9 hours a day on weekdays plus 7 hours on Saturdays. Earning between $7 and $12 a week for 52 hours of work, or $191 to $327 a week, readily enough to live on. A few minutes before the factory closed on March 25, 1911, the building burst into flames and the workers were trapped in the top floors of the building as they were locked down in their working areas, resulting in a 30-minute fire that claimed the lives of 146 garment workers. While the building survived intact, its factory floors contained nothing but charred debris and hundreds of workers, some of them charred beyond recognition and identified nearly a century later. The fire marshal concluded that the likely cause of the fire was the disposal of an unextinguished match or cigarette butt in a scrap bin containing 2 months' worth of accumulated cuttings. Beneath the table in the wooden bin were hundreds of pounds of scraps left over from the several thousand shirtwaists that had been cut at that table. The scraps piled up from the last time the bin was emptied, coupled with the hanging fabrics that surrounded it. The steel trim was the only thing that was not highly flammable. A progressive activist movement was inspired by the tragedy and pushed for workplace safety laws in New York State that ultimately became a model for stronger regulations around the world. Rallies, marches and protests from before the tragedy continued after and took place in March in honor of the victims. This ushered in the establishment of March 8th as International Women's Day and a commemoration of the victims of the tragedy that led to better working rights for women. These was our top 5 historical tragedies that had a major effect on our history. Do you know of any other tragedies that changed history significantly? Let us know in the comment box below. As always, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again in our next video.